Hello, everyone. My name is Shannon Massey, and I'll be your moderator for reading for Business First Pleasure. I'm a writer, filmmaker, and single mom, and was first published during the zine scene in the late 90s. I've been working in writing services as a script doctor, ghostwriter, sensitivity and authenticity reader, developmental editor, and proofreader professionally for about 2 decades. But enough about me. Let's meet the panelists. We have J.R. Hart. JR is a 30-something author creating LGBTQ+ and neurodivergent stories focusing on intriguing romance. When they aren't at home writing, they're visiting their favorite coffee shop, exploring science museums, or relaxing by any body of water. They have 1 kiddo, 2 dogs, and far more coffee mugs than are necessary. Welcome, JR.
Hi.
And next we have Zelda Knight. Zelda Knight is a USA Today bestselling author of steamy romance, a British Fantasy Award-winning and NAACP Image Award-nominated editor, as well as a diverse bookseller. She's also the publisher and editor-in-chief of Aurelia's Leo, an independent Nebula Award-nominated press. Zelda co-edited Dominion, an anthology of speculative fiction from Africa and the African diaspora, Aurelia Leo 2020, which has received critical acclaim, and Africa Risen, a new era of speculative fiction. Tour.com 2022. Keep in touch on social media at AuthorZKnight or visit our website, AuthorZKnight.com. You can also email z@AuthorZKnight.com. Welcome, Zelda.
Hi, everyone.
And we have ML Eaden. ML Eaden works by day in the tech industry, but at night she reads books, writes stories, throws axes, and is an avid gamer with a current addiction to Azul. Originally from the Sunflower State, she migrated to with a Lone Star and more sun, and tries desperately to keep up with 2 adorable cattle dogs that still act like they are 5 years old instead of the seniors the vets say they are. Welcome, Mel.
Hi, everybody.
And next we have Gwendolyn Nix. Gwendolyn Nix is an editor with Anchorite Books, with author and author of the Celestial Scripts fantasy series, The Falling Dawn and Seams of Shadows, Sharks of the Wasteland, and the newly released Weird West dark fantasy, I Have to Be There, Be Where No Storms Come. She lives in Missoula with her husband, young son, and wild silver Labrador. Welcome, Gwen.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And next we have Chelsea CM Lockhart. CM Lockhart, also known as Chelsea, is a Black writer of fantasy because she loves creating worlds, exploring relationships, and writing stories about Black girls who aren't all that nice. She's the founder of Written in Melanin LLC, which encompasses a weekly podcast and YouTube channel of the same name, the Melanin Library, an online database of books written by Black authors. She is also a lover of video games and anime. So whenever she isn't reading and writing or talking about reading and writing, she's watching anime, playing her Switch, and dreaming about the day her books get animated. Thank you all for being here.
Hi, glad to be here.
And I'm so excited to talk to you all about this because I know that it can be difficult to shift between reading for pleasure and reading for business and get, So the first question is, what is the difference between reading for business versus reading for pleasure? Chelsea, do you want to start us off?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So for me, I feel like the biggest difference is kind of something really internal, where it's just like, okay, I have to read this. And 9 times out of 10, that's like accompanied with some type of deadline and expectation that comes along with the reading, whether it's notes, whether it's feedback, whether it's just simply creating content surrounding what you read. It comes with like a different personal expectation versus when you're just reading for fun, you're just kind of like reading for fun. If you stop and have reactions, it's purely like in the moment versus like, ooh, I should be recording myself right now because this is a perfect vlogging moment. And now it's not organic anymore. Or I should write this down so that, if I really love this character's dialogue, I should tell the author that I'm beta reading for that I really love this line of dialogue. It's one is purely organic and for yourself versus, being something that you have to produce for somebody else. And it's just a very different reading responsibility, I'll say.
I agree. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? What do you do?
I think it nailed it. Perfect description.
I think there's also kind of almost this like third tier in there for me personally, where, you know, there is that like very much business aspect where like maybe I'm editing, I'm beta reading, so I have to have my brain like fully in business mode. Then I have that where it's like maybe I'm doing a reread of a book that I've read like a million times and it's kind of a comfort read for me. So my brain is like fully switched off, pure like I'm enjoying this book and I don't have to really think about any of the how does this dialogue work? Is something working for me? And then I have kind of that intermediary where it's like, okay, I know that I'm going to review this. I know that I need to read this in a tighter time span because it is an arc or something, but I'm not giving the level of feedback that I would be if I'm editing this for a friend or I'm beta reading this for a critique partner or something. Like there's kind of this like third middle ground, like maybe for what I'm doing is like some things are pure pleasure, some things are pure business. And then there's that in between of like, I still need to be a little bit more engaged with this than purely pleasure, but not as engaged as like line by line kind of feedback that I might have to be giving.
Yeah, I totally agree with that because as I cleaned off my shelf when I have my 12 arcs I have to get to in the next 2-ish months, I'm very much like that. Like I just finished a big edit on a book that I sent to a publisher, and that is very stressful. That is, you know, you're totally locked on, like, you know, and you're trying to make sure it's the best, most perfect product you can send off. And then, like you said, total switched off. For me, that's a lot of times Penelope's work, like brain is not active. I am just flipping through pages, reliving the joy. But arcs, I think, are, like you said, a very special category because you have no obligation to read an arc. You just have eternal pressure to read an arc, you know, because I get sent arcs sometimes. Like I don't even request them. Like I just get sent arcs. They're like, can you give a review? And I'm like, maybe in like 6 months, I don't know. So it's kind of like this eternal pressure where it's like, I'm not really obligated to give you feedback, but I feel bad not to when you went out your way to like ship me a physical book or give me an audio book or something like that.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can contribute anything that hasn't been so eloquently said already, but I mean, for me, I think, you know, reading for pleasure is just something, it's almost a freedom for yourself. Like you can fulfill that instinctual need within yourself, like, oh, I suddenly need, you know, enemies to lovers or something like that. And I might not be reading that in my current manuscript that I'm editing, or that, you know, an arc that I picked up to like help other people, or, you know, reading it for in a somewhat of a business sense. And I can go ahead and be like, what do I want in like my heart of hearts? Like right now, I desperately need like this type of romance or this kind of dark fantasy. I'm looking for something completely icky, or maybe I want something completely, you know, epic fantasy. So I think for me, I'm very much of an instinctual reader. I'm like, I feel like I need X, whether that be a certain trope or a different type of story, or perhaps like a certain author's voice, and I could just like follow that. Like it's a scent that I can follow with my nose. And when you're reading for business, there's so much more ingrained in it. You have to be turned on, you have to be giving that feedback, and maybe you're, you know, the 12-year-old inside of me doesn't quite want to read that at the moment, but I have to because it's my job and because it also does give me pleasure, but in a different type of way. So for me, it's all about, I guess, fulfilling that instinctual need, or, you know, giving the 12-year-old inside of me exactly the book that they're wanting at that very moment.
Definitely. I think we all have those. I know that when I'm editing, even, you know, or doctoring, there'll be moments where like something will emotionally get me. And so I'll be like, I'll have to set a little note in there like, dude, you just kicked the mom in me in the feels, and I just want to give your character a hug. And so I try and sprinkle, like those will randomly just be sprinkled in with the notes of like, hey, this needs to be formatted this way, or this needs to be edited that way. And it doesn't matter if I'm reading for business or pleasure. It's like, oh, I just need to hug your character now, and I need to mom a little bit. And so we've got so those are all like great distinctions, and I think we, you know, Walt does a wonderful job with that. Do you believe, and this is kind of feeding into that, do you believe that that the two can be one and the same? Why and why not? And Gwen, how about you? Do you want to start us off there?
Yeah, I think it's almost the best of the best when they are one and the same, because I think, as an editor, sometimes when you're looking for certain books or certain pitches that really sing to you, if you can have that feeling of, you are doing the technical stuff, you're looking at plot, you're looking at structure, you're trying to understand their character growth and arc. But then if you can be sucked into that and suddenly be like, I am so immersed in this story and I care about these characters so much. And this is, it's giving, like I said, the 12-year-old inside of you, your 12-year-old is going, oh my God, this is what I've always wanted, or this is what I need right now. And I think when people talk about, certain books singing to certain editors, that's what we're looking for. Like we are looking for, or at least in my opinion, we are looking for that marriage of, I absolutely need this in my life. And I know that someone out there needs it just as desperately as I do. And then at the same time, you can make it even better because you have, as an editor, you have the skill set to do that. You can be like, okay, this character arc doesn't quite work, but if you do this, you're going to hit everything that you need to. So I absolutely think that, when they can be the same, one and the same, and it's the best of both worlds when it happens.
I was going to say that, like, I absolutely 100% agree with that, because it's just like when you're editing, it's like it's so much easier when you're naturally locked into the story and you're naturally rooting for the characters, because then it's like you see things kind of from both sides. It's like the reader, where it's just like, I definitely want to know what's going on. But like the editor part, it's like, okay, you're doing something with the actual craft of your writing that's working, where it's like the people who are looking for this genre are going to have the same feeling of, oh, I want to turn the next page. So it's like when you're looking at your pacing as like an editor, it's a lot easier when you're also enjoying it, because you can tell like kind of innately when it's just like, oh, there's a shift here. And then that triggers your editor brain almost like as a second level of like making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, to be like, hey, let me go back, because like I was really locked into this. And then all of a sudden something around this paragraph just kind of shifted. So it's like it goes back. But for me personally, especially, I don't know how many other people are like this, but if like you're a mood reader, like a crippling mood reader, it's a lot easier to do your work when it's just like, oh, this is also something that naturally I would just read because I would enjoy it. And it makes it the conversation a lot easier when you do return your feedbacks and people have questions. It's like, okay, this is like, understand that I'm critiquing your work because like that's what you're paying me to do, but also I'm coming from a place of, I really enjoyed your story, and I'm not just saying that to like hype you up or gaslight you. Like I really enjoyed your story, but this is what I think could take it to the next level. And when you read in that genre for fun as well, you also have that background knowledge of, this is what's normal in this genre, this is kind of what it's expected in this genre, this is what is kind of like, oh, if you're reading a fantasy novel and it's like high fantasy, is like there's some things that you don't have to explain the same way as if you're writing a romance novel. There are some expectations that the reader come to the book with. And it's just like when they're both, it's a nice marriage of things. It's like cake and icing. You get both at the same time, So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Definitely. It's the best feeling when you get, when you get both worlds, and it's not because I think we've all had those projects where it's that slog and it's like, okay, this is 200 pages. I have to get through this 200 pages because they're paying me to. And like, then it's like, okay, I've got these 10 pages, and okay, I've done these 10 pages, and I'm gonna, I get to play a round of Fortnite, or I get to go dig some holes in Minecraft, or I get to read something else or work on my writing or whatever. And so that's definitely, it's nice when they kind of meld and you get that excitement and that like, okay, oh, I'm getting paid to do this. And I know that I don't know about for you all, but something that can be hard, and I know I struggle with myself, is how do you shut off the business and like / critical part of your brain when reading for fun, so you can just enjoy it? Like, do you all also have issues doing that, or is it just like a switch you can toggle on and off? JR, let's start with you.
For me, a lot has to do with the format that I read in. So I'm pretty set on, if I'm reading something for business, for an editing purpose, I read it obviously like in a doc. Like I'm very set on, this is the format that I read it in. I'm going to make notes directly in the doc. If I'm reading like an arc or something, I usually request an ebook, simply because that's the format that most people are going to have it available in. And if someone's like sending me one kind of cold, I might say, do you have an ebook copy of this? Whereas if I'm reading for pleasure, I'll usually pick up a paperback copy or something, because then I can completely go, okay, this is a different format. This is a totally different thing. To the point that even if I'm like reading fan fiction or something, I might print it out just so that way I know this is a completely different thing than this. Because when I'm looking at it on paper, I can go, this is for pleasure. I can't, like, I'm not an annotator when I read for pleasure. So it's like, I go, I can't mark this up. Like, I can't take a red pen to it. That's not how my brain works. For me, when I'm reading it on paper, it's pleasure read. If I'm reading it on a screen, then it's something more business. So that's the only way I've found that I can separate it out.
Yeah, that made me think, Chelsea bringing up expectations, reader expectations. I find it much easier to read romance in any format and not be critical, because I come in, it's a rare time I open a romance book, or for example, like a main lead dies, or something, like, you have genre expectations, and most people writing romance hit the beats, even if it's not the best story, they hit the beats. So my brain doesn't turn on like, what's going on. Whereas most of my hardcore editing, I would say, is in sci-fi fantasy, and specifically Black sci-fi fantasy. And so it is very hard for me to read any Black sci-fi fantasy and not become overly critical right away. And not even in a bad way. Like, my mind just might, oh, and this, connects to this, and it connects to that, blah, blah, blah. And I see how they're making callbacks to this. Like, it becomes very much, like my brain is in hyperactive mode. So I found that rather than format, it is length that helps me. I tend to read Black sci-fi fantasy novellas and novelettes. Like, I read like not comics, the magazines that come out. I'll read the short stories in there, or I'll get novellas in physical format. And it's just too few words for me to get, caught up in my head. I found it very difficult to read book length of Black sci-fi and fantasy and not, go to town spiraling out. So if anyone has any suggestions, that would be great. And I am someone that also annotates and takes notes too. So I'll get like 20 pages in and I have more notes in the book. I'm like, this is too much. So I tend to just switch back to a genre that I don't get massive editor brain on, personally for me.
I would like to add to that. Like, I fully understand what both JR and Zelda are saying, because it's kind of like, I tried what JR does and like switching up the format. And I was just like, the way I don't know if anybody else is like this, but I go through phases with everything. So I'm like, I have a phase of like, oh, I just want to read on my ebook. I have my little cute little pop socket on my Kindle, and I just want to lay here and read. But then I have moments where I'm like, ew, Kindle, let me get something physical. And then it's just like, so that didn't work for me. And so my thing at this point is, I'm like, okay, I do what I call like a 1-page test for like, if I'm trying to read for pleasure. And it's just kind of like, I read like the first page or the first chapter, depending on how long it is. And I'm like, if I can just think about it, and I'm just like, I just want to know what happens next. And I'm like, okay, I can read this for pleasure because I know that's where my brain is. But if I read it and I'm just kind of like, yeah, I'm not thinking about it, or I'm like, oh, this could be different, or I'm like, why am I not thinking about this? What could have been different? I'm like, oh no, see, editor brain, that's triggered right there. We're not going to do that. We're just going to pick a different book and we're going to go on a different way. And then like the very rare, like shiny Pokemon moment that happens for me occasionally is when it's like, oh, this is really good. And it's triggering my editing brain. But I'm like, ooh, I feel like as an author, I could learn from this. Like, I could really enjoy it and take something from this. So yeah, I'm going to be thinking about it in a really like professional way, but it's a completely different aspect of professionalism. So that's kind of like how I differentiate. It's like, it's the same, but it's not.
I love that. Like 100%. That's all.
Yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment. I'm very much an intentional, like setting the intention before I start reading something. So if I know I'm going to give feedback, I wait for a time to actually do the feedback. Like, I'm in a particular mode for it. If I'm, I'm, and maybe people will cry, or maybe this will be, everybody will identify this, but my pleasure reading is like 4 or 5 books at the same time. I will literally have like several books. I have like one on my Kindle, one on my phone, a physical book, books in my bathroom, like I in my living room. They're all over my house. I and I pick up and put it down and pick it up and put it down. So I'll hop quite a bit. If I'm focused, it's very much like it's in front of me, generally digital, sometimes paper, but I'm in my office, I'm focused on that. So very much kind of the same thing as JR, but I set an intention to like of doing that. Like it's like in the form, if it's pleasure, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, because I allow it's not, you know, I could put the book down. I could just put it down. Like if it's pleasure reading, I could just put it down. I don't feel like this responsibility to keep reading it, or I can read it at my own pace. Whereas if I'm doing something business related, it is very deadline oriented sometimes. So I try to stay with it for as long as possible and then take a break. That could be like hyperfixation too. So I don't know.
Okay, so when you said that, I literally thought like, oh, that need to finish a book. I feel like the more I get used to my like editor brain and the more time I spend with that, the easier it gets to like DNF a book, because it's just like, ooh, I enjoy this, but also this is not doing what it needs to do for me right now. And then just like moving on. And I don't know if y'all have that moment, but I'm just kind of like, it's not bad. I'm just not going, like, I don't feel like I have to finish this book, especially if I'm just reading it because I want to be reading it. And I know that there's a whole conversation on the internet where people are like, y'all DNF books? I can't live that way. How do y'all do it? I'm like, you just put the book down and you walk away. You never pick it up again. And it's really that simple.
I do that. Yeah. I go. Okay. Wait, I was just gonna jump in. I was like I totally do that. Especially when the book is like really good and really interesting and I'm really enjoying it, but the emotions in the book might be hitting at the wrong time too. Everfair is a really good example of a really well-written book, and I've had like to pick it up and put it down, pick it up and put it down, because it goes through a lot of things, and I'm just like, okay, that's hard. Okay, I gotta give myself some space, because and books, science fiction books especially, you know, nowadays really hit in the social space that, you know, we're kind of living in. So it's really cool to pick up a book and then read it, and then you're like in it, and then it's like, oh wow, that's intense. Okay, I need a break, you know. So I give myself space to do that. So I totally get that. I don't think I've completely ever just dropped a book, like, because I have some sort of completionist problem. But yeah, I totally understand that. Yeah. Anyway.
As a fellow completionist, it's not that I'm mad at DNFers. I am jealous because I will go out of my way to get bad endings in games just to make sure I complete it. So it's very hard for me to be like, I'm never reading you again. It has to be like terribly written or something for me to not pick the book back up.
For me, I look at the number of books on my shelf and the number of years in my life, and I look at the number of books I keep adding to my shelf, and I go, there's no way I'm going to have enough time to get to all of these if I don't brutally DNF some books. Like, I've got to stop somewhere. But I thought it was interesting, Mel, you had mentioned about having like certain things in your office, and I didn't realize until you said that how important location is to how my brain works in like what's for business and what's for pleasure, because I realized I will never pick up a book for pleasure in my office. Like if I'm in my office, that's definitely a business read, but my bedroom, my living room, that's filled with pleasure reads. And I don't think I've ever picked up a book for work, like in those spaces. So that's really interesting. You mentioned that, and I'm going, I don't think I ever even thought about that until you said that.
I work wherever my laptop is, and so I'm jealous of the people that have those, like, you know, this is my business space, this is my pleasure space. It's like, oh yeah, maybe I should try doing that, because and over like I said, I've been doing this for decades, and I also work in the film industry, and I've been doing that for decades too. And it took me years to be able to just go into a movie theater and sit down and watch a movie without, oh, like, there's the boom mic, and oh, this is a continuity error, and oh, why did you, like, weren't you wearing a green shirt? Like, are we in a new scene? What's going on? And so, yeah, I literally have to like tell myself, like, Shannon, you are turning that off. You are not allowed to engage that. And if it does start engaging, it's like, nope, come back this way, come back. And so, yeah, but those are some great great ideas, and we'll have I might have to implement them myself. And so speaking of business, and like I know there's a wide variety of why you would read for business, and so what are some of the different reasons that you could be reading for business? Like, is it reviews, CP, research? Zelda, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so we've covered a lot of them already. So editing, right? So you're getting a job, beta reading. I kind of alpha, I put that all kind of together. You're reading a book for somebody else, usually a paid service, sensitivity reading. ARCs are another business read, that kind of middle ground JR was talking about, where someone gives you a book for free and the expectation is that you review it, but you're not under some contractual obligation like when someone hands you money to do it. Another business read I do is, like you said, which is researching. And so, for example, when I'm getting into a new genre, I will read like foundational books in that genre. I'll read the newer work to see like what's different, what's the same. For example, I'm writing middle grade for the first time. I know, very different thing, pen name. And so, I grew up reading middle grade, but, as painful as it is to say, though it was, sometimes 20 years ago. So middle grade has changed, right? So I'll pick up books in that middle ground where it is a pleasure read most of the time, if it's, a good book, but I'm reading it to actually understand in romance, we call it the beats, but in most genres, it's just the structure, So most people are familiar, like the 3 act structure or things like that. In romance, you have the meet cute, you have the dark night of the soul, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of times I have that reading for research. And then also literally reading for research. If you're reading historical fiction, writing historical fiction, you're like, what did they wear in 1885? What did this town look like? So you have to literally read for research too.
Yeah, and sometimes, like in my case, sometimes you're trying to find an author to attach to a project. So another business read would be if I want to work with a specific author, or I'm, potentially pitching a project that has a certain tone or a certain feel or is in a certain genre, and I'll kind of start to research other type of authors that could do this well, but not exactly replicate it or what they've already done. So it's something new and fresh. So I'd be looking for, reading other authors and what they've done, seeing if that tone matches what I'm kind of thinking of when I'm going to contract a book or contract a project. So kind of looking at a range of different type of authors and reading their books and saying, okay, will this match it? Is it too similar? Is it not similar enough? Like, if I say, I need you to do, write me a romance with, this type of trope, can you do that? And will it be something new for you too? So you're excited as an author and I'm excited as an editor. But yet still, the beats, the structure, how this project should go and what it should look like at the end result, at least.
Yeah, I've just over the past couple of years been kind of coordinating a multi-author series. And one of the first things that we did when like a co-coordinator and I, we first wanted to invite some specific authors. And then when people had come to us and said they wanted to join the series, we had to do a lot of reading of who is a good fit for this project. And for the people who came to us, reading their larger body of work and saying, does this fit with what we've already got? Does it represent kind of the goals of our series? So that way, when they produce work for the series, like, is it going to fit with kind of the consistent, like, overarching themes with the work that they've already produced? So we did a lot of reading for business, and that, like, does this match what our like plans are? And that was a big thing for us, was like looking at the whole body of work.
Probably a little bit more niche, but or maybe not. If we're looking at people we hire, like if I'm looking at somebody that's a sensitivity reader or an editor or audio, like you can get into some of that thing. And I mean, audio is obviously more audio, but the idea is that you want to sample their work, right? And so it's one of the things I came from tech writing. I did creative writing, so I didn't get serious about my creative writing until much later. But one of the things that I learned right off the bat is that's just hire an editor out of hand. Make sure that they fit what you're trying to do, and that the voice is complementary. So having them do a spec edit, and then comparing spec edits from different editors to kind of get vibes and stuff, because sometimes they'll come up with things that you hadn't thought of, which is really cool. And sometimes they'll just completely obliterate the idea you were going for, and then that's an obvious, like, yeah, okay, yeah, thanks for, yeah. So yeah, that I think is another small part of business reading. But I always, the weird thing, does anybody else that's editors or has like an editor mindset get like that thing where you get things back from an editor, another editor, and you're like, oh, that's really good, I gotta remember, like, can do that. So then it's like almost like a dual thing going on, because you're like, oh, hey, that's really good feedback. Oh, this is really formatted well, or they thought of this thing and I have to remember to think of that when I'm doing this.
Well, that's kind of think editing is a bit, you have to be boots on the ground a bit. Like it seems weird to say, but it's not something you can go to a class and suddenly, at least in my opinion, totally understand how to be an editor. A lot of it is like feeling and like experience and really digging into a lot of different types of work and trying to, using the tools you've been given, but then also there's a lot of like nuance to it too. So I totally agree with that. Like there's a lot of boots on the ground work you have to do, and sometimes you have to like understand the voice of the writer too, and yeah, finding that meshes or the making sure you mesh with your author is really important.
And that made me think of two other, I guess, kind of niche things is like reading style guides. Like, it's like keeping up with Chicago manual style and stuff is like so stressful. It is so stressful. But also like you were just talking about, Gwen, is like, things change, right? So like when I first started editing, it was kind of like you did not, like when you threw in, different languages and stuff, you always italicized. Like that was just a guide. And now so many authors like push back extremely hard if you try to italicize what we in English, foreign languages, etc. So it's like you have to constantly, be in the motions and learning, even if it's not like whatever formal style guide you're going off of. And then something, I'm not even in this, but something I've seen a lot of my romance author friends get into is translation. So in a language you can't understand, comparing how different translators translate is a very brutal process. Just for example, I've seen a lot of romance authors get into German translations. And one thing is like, it is so different how your voice sounds in a different language, on top of then they translate differently. So just a short example is like for example, Half Moon Woods was in the book. One editor transformed it to almost like a literal Half Moon Woods. Another German translator did Crescent Forest, right? So that could be a completely different, feeling in German versus Half Moon Woods, for example. So the two like niching style guides, and then if you're, big time author, translations can be a lot of work.
I feel like everyone said everything, so I really have nothing to add. The only thing that I was thinking about is just also like when it comes to reading for business, is like reading our own work, because it's like as an author, you read your own book more than anybody else. And it's just kind of like, drafting, so fun, editing. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's not. And then it's just kind of like, it's one of those things where it's just like, my little piece of advice is always like, as the author, if you're not enjoying your work, then like nobody else is. And it's just like, if you have to read it a dozen times, you should still not maybe be excited about it, but you still should enjoy it, every time that you go through it. And so that's like when you edit for other people, when you're doing your self edits before you send it off, it's always just like you're trying to do it the best, because in your mind you're like, yes, I know I need to outsource this, but also like I'm a professional, I should be able to do this myself. So
and then you still find that one typo that snuck through you after 12 readings.
Yes. Oh, and you're like, why? How?
Yeah, how? And it's like you open the book, there it is. No.
Or even worse, the typo that is in a foreign language, because you're kind of throwing in Spanish or French or whatever, and then you mix up the two, and then one of your reviewers points it out, and you're just like, so yeah, that's fun.
I think it's, and I don't know if you all do, but I know that I personally have a blind eye. So like I read when I'm trying to edit and self-edit my own work, I have a blind eye. So I'm reading it the way it's supposed to be written, not the way it's actually written. So there've been times where I'm like, okay, just need like a sanity check on this. Can you guys just make sure that I caught everything? And then I'll have like a note like, hey bro, did you know you have like like an actual number in your dialogue, or like you have like, did you mean like, what is this word supposed to be? Is this supposed to be another character? And I'm like, oh, I thought I changed that like 10 edits ago. Like and you know, so yeah, that's always just so like, I love it. It's so funny. And then I know like I have a process I follow when reading for business versus reading for pleasure, and it involves like, you know, highlighters and notes and stickies. Uh, but what do you all do while reading for business that you don't do while you're reading for pleasure? Mel, let's start with you.
Definitely depends on what format it comes in. I use erasable pens and highlighters. I've gotten addicted to those pretty pretty over the last year or so. I also have to be in a program if it's an electronic format. Somebody sends me a doc or an ebook or something. I have to be in a program where I can make annotations or make side notes. So yeah, I have a so I kind of got into this sort of techie mode, and I have a letterbox screen, so I can have multiple screens open on one screen. It's like 29 inches. It's pretty ridiculous for a computer. But it really does help having that space to be able to do comparative, you know, reads or notes, and then reading back and forth or putting in notes. I love Google Docs for business reads. I mean, that sounds pretty, maybe that sounds a little weird, but if someone sends me a docx, I'll usually load it in Google Docs because it's a lot easier to annotate and then send it, as people like to see things as it happens sometimes. So that I prefer. But yeah, if it's physical format, definitely erasables. And then if it's for pleasure, like I said, it could be any format. And the only thing I need is a bookmark, electronic or physical or something is bookmark. I try very hard not to like destroy my books. Like I don't do the page foldy and like I have to have a bookmark, or I can sometimes use the if it has a dust jacket, I'll use the dust jacket. But at one point I was this is before the pandemic, because my brain, you know, everybody's brains got a little scrambled after that. So, but before the pandemic, I would actually memorize page numbers. And I even didn't matter how many books I had the page number in my head where I stopped. So, but yeah, that's my pleasure versus business.
I just need you to know that that is absolutely wild. I was not prepared for that when I came on this panel. Like I just casually remember the page numbers of every book that I'm reading. That's impressive. I just need you to know that.
I can't do it anymore. I mean, like I it's one of the things that kind of went away, you know. But yeah, no, I literally would be like, okay, I stopped on page 98 and pick it up 3 days later. Okay, I know I'm on page 98. Like I had a thing for numbers for a really long time, and I think as like just stuff like it's just I was like, why am I memorizing this useless data? I could use a bookmark. Oh, okay, right. And I just shifted it. It's like I shifted it out of my head. But yeah, I used to memorize pages. Like I used to be that. Like, oh, okay, I stopped that. And sometimes I still do it, but it doesn't stick as long. But yeah.
I just need you to know if nobody else gave you your flowers, I'm giving you your flowers because that's impressive. So yeah. But I guess to answer the question for me is like I have my computer, my setup, and it's just like it has to be digital if I'm doing work, because I'm like, the way I need to make notes and the way I type faster than I write, I'm like, I need to be able to keep notes, keep track, and highlight things in different colors in the way I'm not keeping up with multiple highlighters at different places. And remembering the color code system, unless I have a document up on to be like, okay, yellow is for this, blue is for this, green is for this. So always like, I have different programs for that. So I use like OneNote for like the long notes, the long-winded ones. That's like, this would be disrespectful to put this in a comment, right? But then I also have like the inline comments, kind of like Mel was saying. I do like Google Docs, especially for beta reading and like reading for like your other author friends, because it's just kind of like, girl, what was you thinking? You can leave stuff like that in comment, in context. But when it's more like, okay, you're paying me to do this, it's like, okay, let me actually expound on this so that we can have a discussion about it later if necessary. But then for personal stuff, it's interesting because that's when I do get really physical. I have like the sticky notes and I have a pen, like my special annotating pen, because I'm not like the booktubers where they're like, oh yes, I have multiple colors and I use a ruler and then I have the special sticky notes that are clear that you can write on. I'm like, ooh, I love that for you, but the way my brain would consider that to be work once I had that many materials. I'm just like, I pick a color for the book that matches the cover. And I'm like, if I see something that I'm like, oh, I really like this, then I'll add a sticky note to it if it's a physical book. But if it's an ebook, I'm not highlighting. I don't know if it's just me, but I'm like, I don't want my ebook highlights to be showing up on my Goodreads. Like, that's personal. That's just for me. I don't need y'all knowing what I'm doing. Okay. So ebooks and stuff, I don't highlight, but if it's a physical book and it's just me, I'll just get a sticky note. Like there's a blue cover, I'll have blue sticky notes and a blue pen, and that's it. Like all of my the love stuff, the good lines, all of it same color, same color. But yeah, that's my system.
I see all of those like TikToks and everything of all the perfectly color coordinated like annotating sets and everything, and I'm like, I want to be that person. There is no way I can ever be that person.
I know with my ADHD, it's like, I want to be organized, but not happening. And I think, like you all said, especially for prose, I love Google Docs because you can then give those comments. And then if the author has questions, you can talk about it, and you can because sometimes there'll be things that I'm just editing to edit. And it's like, oh, wait, hold on. Like, you're trying to do something here and then it's going to pay off down here. I got it. And they can, bro, like, I respect you and you're a professional, but this is why we're doing it this way. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, definitely.
I'll share one little thing because everyone sounds like super like techie, I guess. Like I use Word, and I use track changes, and then I leave comments and track changes, and of course write an editorial letter at the end of every book. But like for my personal self, like I used to put like the sticky notes and they would always fall off and they're super frustrating. So I invested in these things called book darts. I don't know if you can see them, but they're so awesome. They're super thin and they're metal and they don't fall off. This has become my new thing. And then I just slap it in the book and then it's always there. And then you have to go back and find out why I put the book dart there in the first place. But that's a future problem, not a current problem. Yeah. So I don't have highlighters or anything, but I agree with Chelsea. I'm totally, on digital formats and all that.
And then I know that I believe we all are parents, whether furry kids or human ones, and finding the time for anything when you have kids can be really tricky. So how do you balance your time to do both business and pleasure? When we can start with you.
Oh yeah, this is a tough one. So I am a new mom. I have a 1-year-old at the moment, and I have a humongous Labrador who's wild and crazy and loves to like run for hours and hours and hours. And so I used to read like all the time and was always writing, always had like a notebook and would jot down stuff. And when I had my little children, things shifted dramatically. And so I've kind of discovered the need of like small moments of time, that how you can be so useful. So like maybe you have 5 minutes between meetings, and instead of like hopping on Instagram and being like seeing what's there, like try to write down like a sentence or two of your book. And it's almost like small incremental possibilities, like you're either writing a little bit from your reading, or maybe you can have a spare moment to read a paragraph. And then I definitely try to take like an hour, 20 minutes to an hour, like at the end of the day, that's just for me, and just try to read for pleasure, like turn off the editor brain. It's so hard for me. I have to work at it and just like try to become enmeshed, because if I didn't do that, I think I would forget how much I love what I do and how much I love reading and books and characters. Like sometimes you get overwhelmed by it's all work. I, can't stop thinking about character arc. I can't stop thinking about, where they're going to be at the end of the book. And, oh, did it really meet my expectations? No, why didn't it? And then you're like, you go crazy, and you start to lose that love that you started out with. So I always try to remember that, like, try to, like relax, like pretend like your book is a hot tub and you're just chilling in it, and just like trying to relax and remember why you love what you're doing in the first place. And then kind of like filling up that bucket, like trying to revitalize that love for what you were doing. It really seems to help. And even if it's just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, That's all I can really manage at the moment, but it's worthwhile.
One thing that I've been really happy about is my kiddos starting to get to the age where like it's been great seeing his tastes in books like really develop. We love going to the library together, but the older he gets, the more he's starting to get into books that we can read together. And so being able to buddy read books with my kiddo has been a really great way to kind of be more intentional about reading for pleasure, because it's like, oh, we're going to read this graphic novel together. We're going to read this book together. And so we're both reading this thing, which means I have to commit to reading this thing for pleasure. So I'm going to put the business stuff down. I'm going to read this book for pleasure, and we're going to discuss this and we're going to have a good time with it, which has made me more intentional about taking time to read for pleasure. But it also means that this is something that we can bond over and we can both enjoy, which has really helped his love of reading grow. And it's also been a good thing that we can connect over.
Want to add, hopefully in the future, I could have that too. My kid's a big reader. That would be dream goals. People have expectations, their kids, my baseline is please love to read or we're going to have a difficult time.
I know that's my kids, they like to read, but it's this but it's all the books that they're reading right now are for it's mostly school stuff, so they're not reading for fun, because they're like, it's kind of been beaten out of them. They're like, oh no, I just had to read 100 pages in school, do I have to read now? And it's like, so I've just said like, hey, like find something, anything, even if it's a it doesn't matter if it's a web comic or a graphic novel or a book of just a newspaper article. I don't care. Find something that makes you happy, and we can read that together, or you can just read that on your own and we can talk about it. And then how do you guys deal with that burnout though? Do you have tricks for do you shift things over when you're starting to like, I just cannot read another thing? Or do you ever actually feel that, or is it always like, yes, let's go? And Zelda, let's start with you.
So for me, I actually experienced real burnout for like 2-ish years, but it was because of like some family stuff going on, like really intense stuff. But before that, I don't think I ever felt a cliff where I did not want to read anything. And so it's been a real challenge, like relearning how to read in a sense, and read for pleasure, read for business. And I think the main thing that's helped me was reading shorter, like getting back into novellas and things like that, because picking up like, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like people are writing tombs right now. Like every new book I pick up is like 300 plus pages. And I'm like, what is going on? Like the story does not need to go on that long. And so I feel like getting into shorter stuff has really helped me rebuild the, I don't know, muscle to be able to get immersed into a world for a long time. So I would say try to read shorter and like reread comfort reads. Like I started rereading stuff, like even literally middle grade, like I started rereading stuff that was easy to consume to be able to get myself back into reading adult material. Cause it definitely was a struggle and I had never experienced that before. So it was really tough to like literally lose the passion to read. I still had to edit for, money reasons, but to lose the passion to read for pleasure was a difficult thing to go through.
I definitely agree with that. Like, I don't know what it is, especially with like young adult fantasy. It's just like all of a sudden, everything is like forever long. And I'm just kind of like, the way that this did not need to be this long, and the way just looking at it intimidates me, because I'm literally at a point where I'm like, oh, this book is thicker than like my 4 fingers together. I can't. It's not in me. I'm not going to read it. Right. But I think definitely reading something shorter. And for me, something recently that I've just kind of like reminded myself is just like, be mindful that's like you're a whole human. And so like you can love reading and still have like other hobbies. So it's just like reading for fun becomes fun when you're not like, oh, I have a spare moment, therefore I should be reading. The minute, for me at least, when you put on that expectation for yourself, like I should be doing this, it's just like that kind of inherently kind of sucks some of the fun out of it. So it's just like getting back to that, look, oh no, I want to read. I want to actively ignore my husband and my family so that I can read this book. That's the moment I'm trying to get to, you know? So it's just like have other hobbies. So like for me, I'm remembering like, hey, I like to play video games. I like to cook. I don't have to sit here and read this book if I'm like, if in my mind, I'm like, oh, there's a new recipe I want to try, or oh, there's a new video game coming out that I want to play, or I want to go play something familiar, you know? And also, if you happen to be both like we are on screen, and you edit and then you read and then you also write, and that's a lot of isolation that you are giving yourself throughout the day. So interacting with other people outside of your family who are also like doing things that you enjoy. So it's not just, oh, reading a book, but like maybe you buddy read with someone. So you have someone, you're reading a book for pleasure, but you're also talking about it for pleasure. It's not work related. You're not breaking it down. You're just like, oh, this was really fun. Did you see on page 128 when homegirl was just like, yeah, I'm gonna slap you in the mouth right now. Like, wait a second. I was not prepared for this. So yeah, just talking to other people and like kind of coming out of your isolationist space that you can unknowingly create for yourself sometimes, and, you know, appreciating your other hobbies and allowing yourself to be a whole person outside of just being a reader.
For me, a lot of my burnout kind of came in a business sense where I was doing a lot of editing work in a very short amount of time span. So I was editing quite a few books back to back to back. And so it came to a point where I ended up, to try to get through it, cut out a lot of my pleasure reads, because it was like I felt like I was just doing nothing but reading all the time. And so I had to get to a point where it was like, this is the number of chapters I'm going to do a day, and I will take set breaks between each chapter. And when I hit this number of chapters, I'm logging off. It could be a great book. It could be a really frustrating book. This is the number of chapters I'm doing a day. And so now I really try to stick to that limit, like even when I'm not in burnout, because if I don't, then I risk kind of getting back into that cycle of burnout. And that's the expectation that I set with the people that I'm editing for, of this is the number of chapters I can do in a day. This is how long it will take me to get through your book. Because otherwise I will just get back in that cycle.
Definitely those, yeah, like setting those boundaries is important. I was, for a good chunk of my career, it was the like, oh, I need to be able to like eat and pay bills. So it's like how many, so sometimes I would be working like 18, 20 hours a day. And yeah, it just like, it's like, okay, I need the money. But it gets to a point where you're like, you're not giving the client, you're not doing them or their project justice, because you're so, like, I just have to get through this. Okay, I don't care anymore. And so it's, yeah, finding that joy and fighting that is important. And it's we're on one of our last questions here. Time flies. This has been such a great conversation, and this is kind of two parts. The first part is, how does the choice of fiction versus nonfiction books play into reading for pleasure versus reading for business? And kind of the follow up is, how does genre, like, you know, maybe sci-fi and fiction or self-help and nonfiction make a difference in your reading approach? And Mel, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so for me, you know, because I work in tech, so there's a lot of reading for business there too. And also, you know, writing guides, publishing guides, formatting guides. So there's all those things, you know, self-help on, especially when you're an indie or a self-pub. You tend to read a lot of like things like almost like DIY stuff. Brain has to really want to read the nonfiction, and has to really be like, I need this, like I absolutely need this, and I will sit and focus on it. Fiction, anything, like it's in and out, whatever, you know, I don't really have to, I just have to be in the right mood for it. I don't have to be in like a particular mindset, but definitely nonfiction. You know, I was trying to think if there was really any fiction that I'm like that with, and I can't think of anything right off the bat. Maybe horror. Like I really like, if someone needs me to read a horror book, I really need to be in like a very safe place for that. Not it's funny too, because I've written horror and I can write horror, but I can't read or watch it. Like, I don't know why. Like, I have this like thing that it freaks me out. Anyway, so but yeah, I think where nonfiction is at, I have to be in that space for it. Like I just finished like Zoe York's Romancing Your Plan. It's a very short book, but man, it took me a week to finish it because I was just trying to absorb what was in that book and make sure he's like, okay, I'm doing that. Okay, and then go back and then, note things and make plans and draw pictures and all this other stuff. So, I feel like you have to be a little bit more engaged when you're reading for business. Not a little bit, a lot more engaged. So, yeah.
I'll chime in. I think for me, I'm kind of the same. Like I am a part of a book club, and they read every other month, like a nonfiction, then a fiction, a nonfiction, then a fiction. And they're very focused on like fiction, not like genre fiction. And I don't think I would read those books unless I was in this book club. But I find it so valuable because like I read and I write and I edit sci-fi fantasy horror. Like that's what I live and breathe in. And so to be able to get outside of that is so helpful because it can become inspirational. Like I think we were just reading this book called Entangled Life, and it's about fungi. And like I love biology kind of books and stuff like that. But I would never have picked it up otherwise. And it was so cool. And it literally like helped me get through this roadblock in my own writing. And I was like, oh my God, this is part of a cool magic system. And then it kind of like blew up in my brain. But I don't think I would have had that unless I had kind of stepped out of my genre and, saw something new or read something new. So I think I kind of go towards like nonfiction books, with hoping that it'll kind of somehow inspire me, but just kind of like stepping out of the norm for a little bit. But yeah, I don't actively seek them out or like read them for pleasure unless it's I can engage with somebody else, and talk with other people. And then it's almost like I get those benefits of, inspiration and also kind of stepping out and, broadening my horizon.
For me, I feel like this is one of those areas where I want to work to be more intentional, but maybe I'm not. And that even when I do read nonfiction for pleasure, I feel like it's still something that I'm reading kind of with the underlying intention to kind of better my writing. That like I write a lot of queer fiction, I write a lot of neurodivergent fiction. And so I'm reading a lot of books on like queer history and queer stories when I'm reading nonfiction. I'm reading a lot of, books written from an autistic perspective or from, about neurodivergent stories and things like that when I'm reading something that is nonfiction. And all of that kind of funnels back into my writing, even if I'm reading it for pleasure. And so I want to do something like Gwen said and kind of branch out into something that's completely far off from what I'm reading or writing, because that could still spark some inspiration. But I feel like I tend to very much stick to the nonfiction that still funnels right back into what I've been writing.
Yeah, I would say for me, I already, made my point about Black sci-fi fantasy, how hard that is for me, like, to turn my thing off, turn my editor brain off. But I would say for nonfiction, a little spiel about me. I was studying to become a public historian and work at museums. So I read a lot of nonfiction. Like that was basically all I did really was read nonfiction, but mostly from a historical angle, other stuff as well. But I think for me, I can't open up a nonfiction book without it being for business in my mind, because it's usually to learn, like putting together an exhibit. So I read about this guy that founded a town or, something like that. So it's very hard for me. I don't think I ever go out of my way to pick up a nonfiction book, biographies, especially, dear Lord, like I read so many of them already. So it's like, it's very hard for me to just want to read that for pleasure. But I will say that I am very much someone, like if I'm reading for pleasure, it is very rare for me to not be reading a romance novel, just very rare. Like that's just my automatic, I grab a romance novel. So yeah, I do think I kind of have a narrow set too. I read broadly in romance, but I have a very narrow set. Like unless I have some pressing need. I don't really, there's so much romance to read. Like as JR said, there's not enough time in my life to read every romance that's been published. So I never really feel a need, but maybe that is something I should challenge myself on, because there are some really good, at least for me, self-help books that have come out recently that I very much enjoy because of a workbook club that I would have never picked up otherwise. So, that's a, great point that like I would have never picked this up if ladies at work weren't like, oh my God, this changed my life. And so, maybe I should do more of that. But again, the years of my life and the amount of romance on my shelf already, it's not looking too good that I'll get through all of it. So I feel like there's no need to push myself.
I would have to say that I'm kind of in the same vein. I don't really pick up a whole lot of nonfiction unless it's something specific that I'm like, either I'm interested in the person who the book is about, like just in general, because I think I started reading like Gabrielle Union's book because I was just like, oh, inherently, I just find her to be interesting. I didn't finish it because I'm a chronic DNFer and we've already discussed that. But I pick stuff up for that, or like if I know for a fact like there's something in a book that someone recommends, they're like, oh, you mentioned this thing and I think that this book would be helpful. Like there's a book called like Mother Hunger, where it's just like the author talks about, dealing with relationships with, your mother specifically as a daughter, where it's just like, this is not necessarily always the healthiest relationship, but as an adult, you learn to like deal and process with things a little bit differently than when you're like a teenager and things are happening to you. You're like, why don't you treat me like I want you to? There are just different moments where it's like, yeah, picking up a nonfiction book is great. But for me, my like go-to, it changes because I have phases. I think I mentioned this. I have phases for everything. So sometimes it's a romance. It's like, I don't want to think. I just want two people falling in love and being happy. Don't give me no stress. Don't give me no drama. Don't give me none of that. I just want fluff. I want happy, right? So sometimes it's that, and sometimes I'm like, you know what? I need someone who's going to be like, let's burn it down. I need some type of fantasy, some type of rebel, some type of we're going to lead the resistance type energy. And then sometimes I'm really into like lately, my go-to has been like psychological thrillers and like bordering on horror, because I'm just like, ooh, are they gonna get to come up? Why is everybody dead? What's happening? It depends. It depends on the mood, So, but I'm almost never, I'm not gonna say never, but in the 28 years I've been alive, I've never been like, ooh, you know what phase I'm in? I'm in the phase of nonfiction. I want somebody to tell me how to live my life. No, my mom did that. My dad did that. It doesn't work out. Like, I'm good. Let me figure this out. Trial and error. So yeah, that's kind of where my brain goes.
I know, yeah, I was joking with someone recently that I spent my 20s running towards danger. I spent my 30s recovering from my 20s, and I'm still in denial that I've entered my 40s. So it's like, I definitely feel that. And yeah, for me, it's definitely like books on like ADHD and like learning how, like, oh, this is totally just a normal part of how my brain works. And then, things like that have been super, super helpful, definitely. And someday I'll have time to read fiction for pleasure again, maybe. But I can't believe our time is already up, and this has been such a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate you being here. Hopefully the folks watching at home have also got a lot out of this. If y'all want, we can, before we go, you can just go through, and if you have something you want to promote or share your social media or anything, and JR, we can start with you and we'll just go around the screen.
I am at JR Hart author on pretty much all platforms. And I have Hart on his lead that just came out. And then I also have, oh, it's clipping, Go Truck Yourself that just came out from the Clover Hill Romance series. So it's a multi-author series and I would love for people to check it out.
Okay. So on all social media, you can find me at author Z Knight. Knight was the sword. And if you want a free romance, I don't know which way I'm pointing. If you want a free romance book, you can sign up for my newsletter, Zephyr's Curse. It has grimoires, it has magic, it has shifters, and you know what's going to happen at the end. A nice love story. So check that out if you want to get a free book.
Okay, I was looking at the screen. I was like, who's next? Is it Gwen? Is it me? What? Okay. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Chelsea C. I'm Lockhart. I go by C. Lockhart as in my last name, Wright, W-R-I-T-E, everywhere on the internet. And I'm the owner of Written in Melanin and the Melanin Library, which is an online database of books written by Black authors. So if you're ever looking to diversify your bookshelf, we have over 3,000 books on the site and we're constantly growing. So feel free to check it out. All the books are sorted by genre as well as age range, so you can find whatever it is that you're looking for. I also have a podcast where we talk about things Black and bookish, and it's fun. We like to have fun. We're here for the giggles and the tea, right? So I also have this book coming out, We Are Dying Gods. It's coming out August 29th. It is the sequel to my first book, We Are the Origin, and it's about a group of assassins who have to work together to save the gods in their realm from destruction. I'm really excited about it. And I also have a short story in an anthology called The Stygian Society coming out in June. And feel free to check that out as well. Both books are indie published. So, support an indie author. That's really cool around these parts, So yeah, that's pretty much it. Podcast, Melanin Library, YouTube channel, buy my book. Yeah, that's everything. Thanks for having me.
How about you, Gwen?
Okay, and my screen at the very top, so I was like, I don't know. So
Okay.
yes, I
I
will go
just
next.
realized that not everyone might be in the same circle I am. So I was like, I should probably walk people through this maybe.
We'll get it. We're almost there. Yeah, so you can find me at gwendolynix.com. It's always some version of my name. So nix.gwendolyn, gwendolyn.nix, Nix, Gwendolyn, whatever it may be, on Twitter and Instagram, and of course my website. And please always check out my book, I Have Asked to Be Where No Storms Come, from Crystal Lake Publishing. It is about witch brothers versus the world. It has kind of supernatural vibes. There's monsters, transformative magic, like ancient goddesses of thunder and lightning. It is my recently released one. It's a little bit darker. It doesn't have so much of a happy ending, but it does have a good ending, I would say. So hope you all check it out. And thank you so much for letting us be on this panel. This was fantastic. And it's so wonderful to meet all of you.
Yeah, you can find all my socials are ML Eaden, and Linktree is ML Linktree / ML Eaden altogether. So my current universe, I guess I'm working on as Mythical Desires universe. It's a very queer monster romance, and so the next book's coming out, very apt for May, is a merfolk book. So a lot of romance, high sea stuff. There's a little bit of a flip in where you get more of the underwater life of merfolk versus like the merfolk coming on land and living amongst humans. Some of that, but it's primarily underwater. So there's like a whole thing there. But yeah, ML Eaden, and then mleden.com is my website. And all of queer monster romance stuff is out, and I have promos running right now for anything queer monster romance you want to check out. You can find the links there as well.
Fantastic. And I've had such a great time moderating this, chatting with you all. And I'm my production company is girlstothe.frontproductions.com, and and you can find me in my writing services, and you can all the crazy shenanigans we do there. And so thank you all so much for being here and joining us for reading Business versus Pleasure. If you have any questions for the panelists, pop over to Discord, and a few of us might be around to have a chat. And you can also check everyone else on their socials. So thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and joining us.